going to take the power brake booster out and rebuild it. Disconnected the 1/4-inch brake line here that feeds the junction block that feeds all the wheel cylinders. Disconnected the 5/16 brake line here that comes up from the master cylinder. I couldn't get this one off, so I had to cut the tubing with a air saw to get that out. And I'll just deal with it once I get it out of the car. To take the unit out, you'll disconnect the vacuum hose, and there's 3 mounting points over here that it's kind of hard to see, but it uses these hook bolts for 2. There's a mounting point here and a mounting point down below, and then there's a bolt in there. There's 3 places where it mounts to the bracket, and once you disconnect those 3 points, it just pulls right out. Here's the mounting points here, here, and a bolt goes in here. Here's what it looks like. That's the bracket. Pretty heavy duty. It looks like 3/8 of an inch. 2 big nuts bolted to the upper control arm A-frame. Alright, so that's what that looks like. Alright, this video is just to show you what I'm encountering taking apart my power brake booster. This is 1955 out of my coupe DeVille. It's got the larger end cap with the check valve in it. In 1955, the check valve was moved from the master cylinder to the power brake booster. My master cylinder also has a check valve in it, so somewhere along the line it was changed, and I'm not sure if they are even compatible. I have to assume the car was being driven when it was finally parked in around 1994. But anyway, this video is just to show you some of the things I've encountered trying to take this apart and work on it. And I've already taken this apart and cleaned it up and put it back together, just in an effort to try to make a cleaner, nicer video to watch. But you're going to need a vise and a torch to get this out of the car if you're going to attempt this. These are the 3 mounting points that I mentioned earlier, and you can see I got 2 different lock washers on these hook bolts, and that just is an indication that someone else has worked on this. And another indication is this vacuum tube right here has got a kink in it, so it's been damaged. Someone took this apart. I also had some blue silicone right here, and that definitely wouldn't be factory, so that tells me that this vacuum control valve has been taken apart before. There's also a sticker right here. It's decomposed, it's in rough shape, it's half missing. I can make out 2 words, the words Florida and clutch. So Florida clutch, some company has probably rebuilt this master cylinder. So this is the vacuum control assembly. This is the hydraulic cylinder assembly, and this is the vacuum piston assembly, and this is a check valve assembly. So there's like 4 groups here that you have to deal with. So you have to heat this up to break this nut loose. Got to put it in a vise. I had to use a 24-inch pipe wrench, which kind of marred the surface up a little bit. I hate that. I'll have to try to fix that. But the first thing you do is you remove the hydraulic cylinder assembly. That's the hydraulic piston, and this is the hydraulic cylinder right here. On the exploded view, this rubber seal is not on the exploded view. There is a rubber seal here that is on the exploded view. This one is not, so I'm not sure what the story is there. But you got to put this in a vise, use heat. The book says a opening wrench on the flat spots of the cylinder will break it loose, but again I had to use a 24-inch pipe wrench, break it loose. It's on there pretty good. So that's the cylinder, and you got a crush washer in here, copper, that seals the end of the cylinder into the end cap. And inside you've got a check valve. The check valve I talked about, that is in the master cylinder in 54 and moved to the power brake booster in 55. So to take the check valve out, small screwdriver will do it, but put your hand over this, because when you pop the snap ring out, it's going to fly out, and you don't want that to happen. Alright, so there's the snap ring, and then you've got a stop washer and a spring, and the spring is conical. These coils are larger than these coils. The small coils go in first. They go in up against the check valve. They seat nicely. The small end seats nicely in the check valve. The bigger end will not. So it's directional when you put it back together. I didn't get a new check valve with my rebuild kit, which is kind of, I think, unusual. So I'm going to have to put this in the ultrasonic cleaner with some detergent or something and try to clean that up and reuse it, which doesn't seem right, but that's the way it is. So I'm going to try to arrange things in the same order that I remove them. So hopefully it will be a little easier to put back together. Alright, next thing you got to do is take the piston out, this piston, and to get the piston out, it's held in on the back side by a small pin. So to get the piston to come out, you have to compress the vacuum piston. So you have to get to the vacuum piston to do that. Just moving the flexible line back. Got to kind of twist it around a little bit, get it to separate, like that. Then, I've already loosened all this stuff up, but you loosen the hook bolts. There's 4 of them. Rotate them out of the way. And the first time I disassembled this, I had to take one of my picks, go around the perimeter. I applied a little bit of heat. I tapped it lightly with a rubber hammer. Couldn't get this to move. It's supposed to pull right off. So I went around the perimeter with one of my picks and tried to scratch. There's an O-ring inside, a very thin O-ring inside, and I tried to scratch a little bit of it away if I could, and then I found a spot where it seemed to be slightly separated, and put a screwdriver in here and very gently twist it, and it'll pop off. But that was actually kind of difficult the first time I did that. So then should be able to just pull the cylinder shell off of the vacuum piston. So there's the shell. Inside I found a lot of rust right here. I think it's just on the surface. I should be able to polish that out with some real fine sandpaper or polishing paper. Okay, so now we're trying to get this piston out right here. So if you compress the vacuum piston, the big vacuum piston, see the piston, the hydraulic piston will come out. So there's a special tool that the book says you need to compress the vacuum piston and hold it in place. It looks something like that. I made this, but I decided to do something different. Compress it by hand and just put a couple of these plastic clamps on there. Try to hold it in squarely till you get both clamps on so you don't bend the vacuum piston shaft. I don't think you'd bend it, it's pretty heavy duty, but don't want to take any chances. So once you get that vacuum piston assembly compressed, now you see the pistons hanging out. And you're probably not going to be able to see it, but there's a little pin. There's a spring here and a little pin. And to get the piston off, you have to pull the pin. You have to locate the pin, use your pick to pull up on the spring and push on the pin until the pick is in the indent. Then use your fingernail or another pick and go around to the other side while you're putting a little bit of pressure on that pin with the first pick and lift up, and it will pop out. It's not cooperating with me right now. It's going to fight me, but alright, so I'm pushing on the pin. Now lift up on the other side of the spring, and the pin has popped out. You probably can't see it, but it's popped partially out, and I just use my finger and pull the pin out. There's the pin, and now the piston comes right off of the vacuum piston shaft. So there's the piston. It's got a seal on it, and there's some components inside that we've got to get out. So for now, I'm gonna release the vacuum piston slowly and carefully. Release it and remove it along with the big return spring. And this comes apart further as well, of course. I'll just set that aside for now. I'll set this over here, and now we have to disassemble the hydraulic piston. So the components are, they just call this a retainer right here on top of this washer. To get that retainer off, it's that kind that it's like a compression, like spring steel. And to get these things off, if you try to grip it around the outer perimeter and squeeze, you're actually causing it to tighten up. So the way I found to do it is to put the point of a razor, in there, and just carefully kind of walk it up, wiggle them back and forth and walk it up. Don't let it fly off though. And let's see. Yeah, it's hard to just pull right up, because when you pull on it, it's actually trying to tighten itself up. So you got to keep walking it up, and there you go. Pop right off. There's that. So now next off is this washer, and then there's a retainer. It's a sort of a C-shaped snap ring, and it's not fun to get this off. You're going to need your pick, and you got to get underneath it, and you'll wind up chasing it around because it's going to move, but you've got to get underneath it and pry it out and up. And I'm gonna cut the video for a second while I do it. Alright, the reason I cut the video is because it takes a while to get this spring out. I used this slightly angled pick and got behind the spring. You got to get behind it, you got to pry it out, you got to pry it up. And the problem is the spring will go flying The first time I took it out, I got really lucky. I think it hit the ceiling, came back down, hit the workbench, landed on the floor. I heard it and I looked, and I got lucky and I looked right at it. But point being, when you take this spring out, this spring clip out, be careful. You'll lose it. So after you get the spring out, this piece comes out, and they call it a retainer. And then you've got this spring. That spring right there. And you got a check ball check valve, whatever. And that's it. There's no need to take this spring off the piston. I don't know exactly how you get that off, but and there's these little legs right here that are part of the check valve, but I don't think it's necessary to take that out. This cup peels off, comes off, and it's you replace that. Of course, you put everything in some cleaner. But anyway, so here's the order that all this came out. Right there. That's it. So let me think here. Okay, so that's that. We'll move it over here out of the way. All right, so that's that. All right, so next is there's a rubber seal that seals the end of the hydraulic cylinder, and it basically went on right there. But when you unscrew the cylinder, it stays down in the end plate. So I'm gonna just keep that together. Next, another snap ring down inside that has to come out. And that's gonna let us get to another seal. So this snap ring is a little more controllable, but I'm gonna go ahead and cover the end up. So it doesn't fly out. All right, so here is this snap ring. And when I took this out before and I tried to reassemble it, I had a really hard time getting this back in. So I clamped this in my vise and used a hammer and closed up these loops a little bit. And then I had to grind down a pair of needle nose to make a good positive set of snap ring pliers. And I used that to, it doesn't seem to be working now, but anyway, I used that to put it back together. So that's a problem C-clip right there, or snap ring, that's a problem. And then next comes out a stop washer. And this stop washer is star shaped. And then next, and this gets a little confusing to me because this is not on the exploded view diagram. There is a spring that is not on my exploded view, and I looked, it's not on the 1954 or the 55, so I don't know why they leave that out of the exploded view, unless I'm looking at this wrong. Maybe you can correct me on that, but I just don't see it. All right, so then here's something else, a little controversy. The exploded view says that after I pull that star-shaped stop washer out, the next component to come out is a retainer. and here is the retainer. And here's the problem. With my retainer, there's a beveled stop washer that is on top of my retainer. The book says the retainer comes out first, then a rubber cup, and then a stop washer that's beveled. So I don't know why this beveled stop washer was on top of the retainer. Here's the counterbore side. It says the counterbore side goes down towards the rubber seal. I'm going to pull the rubber seal out now. All right, so there's the rubber seal. And this is the way it came out of my unit here. There's the rubber seal, there's the retainer, and the stop washer was on top. Now I don't know if that makes sense or not, but if you look at the exploded view and the text description on disassembling this thing, it should have been like this. The beveled stop washer, then the cup, then the retainer. But mine was like this. Now if you go to the reassembly section in the book, it also says the first thing to go in is the stop washer, the beveled stop washer. Then the seal, then the retainer. So I got to deal with that. I got to think about that. Like I said, this thing's been taken apart before. It was either put back in the wrong order, or there is the possibility that the first time I took this apart that I accidentally digging these components out. No, I don't know. Maybe when I dug the retainer out, I somehow flipped it over. But even still, this washer belongs under the cup. So I have to deal with that. I have to think about that before I put it back together. I'm going to put it back together like the book says. And I'm going to put it back together in this order. Like that. That's how it's going back together. Alright. Alright, so I just moved everything over there. Next is, I'm going to go ahead. This is the 5/16 brake line that I had to saw. I had to cut the brake line because I couldn't get the nut to break loose. But this is also has a copper crush washer underneath it. Oh yeah, here's the pin for the hydraulic piston before I lose that. Okay, so this has the copper crush washer, and there's the brake line fitting. That's all there is to that. Then there is the check valve, the vacuum check valve. Just remove that from the end plate. Take this apart. Alright, so this is just a coupling and a nipple, and then inside here you got another snap ring. Love these snap rings. Alright, here's the snap ring, and the next component out is the retainer, a retainer. And it goes back in directional. There's one side is indented. I don't know if you can see that or not. Probably not. Next out is the spring with the check valve on it. It's a rubber or a composite of some type. It's vacuum operated. So here's that retainer right here, and you can see that the way they go together is the retainer keeps the spring centered, so it only goes that way. And so that's it for that vacuum check valve. So that goes like that, and then your retainer. All right, so that's what I got out. So next is the vacuum control valve, this assembly here. Well, the last component is the seal, the vacuum piston seal is right here. But you got to use a hammer and a drift or a flat punch to knock it out. And I believe it knocks out from this side. Right now I have a question about this. I have to research a little bit, because if I look down in here, I don't see the seal. I see what appears to be a fibrous type washer. A washer seems to have like a crosshatch pattern on it, and that's not on my exploded view. So I'm going to research that before I go hammering on that. I might opt to try to grab the seal from this side and pull it out, because that bothers me a little bit. But anyway, so the vacuum control valve comes out next. And when I took this apart the first time, and there's some more of that rubber silicone on there that indicates that this has been messed around with. The first time I took this apart, it was full of something, and I don't know what, and I'm not sure how to describe it. It was like, looked like little balls of silicone. They weren't hard, they were like rubbery, like whatever it was, I guess was something decomposed. I don't know if it was brake fluid. I don't think it would be brake fluid, because this is vacuum. I'm not sure. I guess one side is exposed to brake fluid because you got this bleeder valve right there. But it was come to think of it, it was the bottom side of the diaphragm. So maybe it was brake fluid. I don't know. But I chose to not show that to you, and instead clean it out to make a better video. But as you can see, it's not exactly clean. And here's another issue I have with this. This component right here, I believe is called a poppet, which would make it a valve, I guess, a poppet valve. It looks like it goes against there. I'm not sure how this works. But this poppet valve is not on the exploded view either. And I don't quite understand why, but I do get a new one with the kit, so I'm not gonna worry about that. More silicone. I'll just replace it. But anyway, it's not shown on the exploded view. One thing I probably should have done first, before I did this, here's a snap ring. This is the air inlet. Snap ring pops out. It's a pretty easy one. Then you have, they call this a screen. Comes out. The screen is flat with the large holes. Then you have a filter element. Then you have another snap ring. Comes out fairly easy. Another snap ring. Then you have another screen that is not flat. It's got an indent, and the reason it's got this little indent is because of this spring right here. Conical shape again, small coils go in first. Larger coils fit right in that indent that helps keep that spring centered. So that's what that deal is all about. So we have this snap ring, the flat screen, the filter, another snap ring, this screen, and the conical shaped spring. And this is the other side of that poppet valve right there. And if you unscrew the screw, the poppet valve, I guess it's a valve. I guess I should just call it a poppet. And I can't find where I read that, but I'll have to find that again. This doesn't seem very secure to me. It seems like that screw should have been Loctited in or something, but it sure came out easy. But anyway, that's that. So that completes the disassembly of the vacuum control valve. And so it goes like that, and like that. And here's the diaphragm. There's a gasket here too. The diaphragm, the gasket goes on first and the diaphragm drops in on top of it. But it's hard to tell here. Seems to be all one piece. Maybe that's been rebuilt. Okay, so this is a little bit of the crustiness that was in there. See, it's like a powder, like a whitish looking powder. And this is in pretty rough shape right here. All right, that's the diaphragm. Then you have a snap ring, which I already took off, and I just so happens that I left it loose. This also looks like a modern snap ring, like this type here. So this may not be original factory. So it goes like that. So the snap ring comes out, and then there's a washer comes out, a stop washer. And there's a piston. Now to get that piston out, it may just come, I think it will just pull out. No, well, all right. You need a 1 1/8 inch socket to get this valve fitting out. Okay, and I had to heat this up. I had to put this in the vise, heat it up, because it was not going to come out. All right, there's a gasket, a